In the big scheme of things, I can't take a whole lot of artistic license with the fish. I mean fishermen will not buy a fish that does not look like a fish.
In my paintings, why does this bird have 10 feet? I think someone could still look at it and not knowing the motivation, can still appreciate the painting just in and of itself.
My name is Graham Shotter. I'm a multimedia artist. I work in all sorts of different areas with different media. I've been doing this for 25, 30 years now, ever since I came to the States from Australia.
My name's Justin Gibbons, and I live over in Thorpe, Washington, Central Washington. And probably for the better part of my adult life, I've been painting images inspired by classic natural history art, classic wildlife illustration.
I live in Bellingham, Washington now, and have been here for about 10 years, but prior to that I was in Denver, Colorado, and the entire Denver airport is covered with stainless steel. And myself and a friend of mine we ran a sculpture studio in Denver, and everybody came to us and wanted stainless steel backsplashes and you know, stainless steel just like the airport with a grind pattern on it. So we would use angle grinders to put the grind onto the stainless. Eventually we worked our way into a water pattern on the stainless, and as soon as you've got a water pattern, you immediately think fish, so you start putting fish on it. You move to salmon and they take off. On display here at Kent, I've got my stainless steel series. Stainless steel heads, I call it. I've branched into birds and feathers and a few other things, but for the most part it's a salmon and steelhead. I've been working on an angle grinder for 25 years, so I've kind of got the hang of that. You start layering up different patterns, and each pattern will refract the light differently, and so that's where you get the depth. So when you walk past these pieces, they seem to move the angle that you're looking at it, or the lighting. As the lighting changes, the pieces seem to change, and it appears, especially with the fish, it appears that the fish are actually swimming. It's very holographic in the right light. I mean, in gallery lighting, that really comes up. And in sunlight, they're just fantastic. You know, it looks like it should have some texture, but it's dead smooth because of the way I do it. I don't put any clear coat on it. It's just as it is. I'm really only burnishing the image into the surface of the steel. There is no texture. It begs to be touched. You know, it does. So you just got to clean it with a little stainless cleaner or WD-40, and you know, the fingerprint's gone and you're away. I'm starting to use more and more appliance panels as well. So I'm salvaging the stainless from refrigerator doors and dishwasher doors. Two of the bigger pieces I've got on display here at the Kent show are a refrigerator door and a dishwasher door. They're a little bit difficult to be recognised as that, because I've filled the holes, taken the handles off, filled the holes up. But still, it's nice to take something out of the landfill and reuse it. Not everybody's going to love it, and not everybody's going to want it in their house, but I think the fact that they don't understand the process and they don't understand how you can get that detail with an angle grinder creates a level of appreciation that not all artists get. There's a lot of painters out there, a lot of photographers, and they're all got their own slant on what they're doing, and they're all slightly different. Most people that come down to see the show will, I think, probably be just surprised. Both artists are not working in regular fields.
I'm imagining that we were paired up because of our wildlife imagery, I suppose, would be an obvious connection.
He's got beautifully illustrated work, and it's relatively spare, so you're drawn in to the detail of the piece.
And you can make the case that disparate artists can actually be a nice pairing. I think in this case, though, you're going to see pretty nice, maybe unlikely visual complement. This love affair I have with this classic imagery probably all began back in, I would say, 2002, 2003. Someone turned me onto this program at the University of Washington in natural science illustration. And I thought, well, that seems like way more in line with the direction that my own studio work was going. I started looking at the whole history of this scrutinized observation drawing and how prior to the advent of the camera, scientists really relied on artists, and often scientists wore the hat of an artist too. There's a certain attention to detail that's really beautiful, but oftentimes the anatomy is just not quite right. There's little problems with it, I guess you could say. And so I kind of capitalize on that in my own work where, you know, I'm presenting something in the same maybe stylistic aesthetic that these old cats were working in, but I'm intentionally kind of embellishing those problems where originally there was no understood problem. It's only reflecting back and looking at it, kind of cross-examining, that we can say, oh, that's pretty off. So it wasn't the original intention of the work, but that's, I guess to get to my point, that's kind of what I try to hone in on and bring out and embellish in my own work is those anatomical kind of curiosities, I suppose. Typically, you might think of watercolor as a medium that's very translucent, but in my process of painting, I do what's referred to as glazing. So what you're doing is you do one pass, you let it dry, and then you come back and you do successive layers on top of that. So you're building up. In any given painting, you look at the feather detail, and I probably painted that single feather maybe 3 or 4 times. If you've painted before, maybe you know that watercolor is not the most forgiving of mediums, unlike maybe acrylic or oil painting, where you can pretty easily rectify a mistake by painting over, but you don't really have that luxury with watercolor. There's a certain permanence there once you've applied that pigment to the page. I use a heavyweight paper for a few reasons. One, I don't really care for the buckling that happens when you're working on a thinner piece of paper. And though you can stretch a painting afterwards, flatten it if you do have those warbles, I just prefer to use a really stout, heavyweight watercolor paper. It also gives you the ability to get out a piece of sandpaper if you've made a mistake, and you can actually sand the mistake down. And the paper's thick enough that you're not going to burn through it. So it's like a fine grit sandpaper does the trick. I was just was in Africa over the summer, so I'm thinking that even though you don't see anything here, I'm thinking that the next batch of work will showcase some of the pageantry of wildlife that we got to encounter when we were there. So generally, that's the source of inspiration for me is having some sort of encounter. So, for instance, I've seen some humpback whales up in Alaska in Glacier Bay, and so I thought, these are amazing creatures, I better paint some of them. So it's wanting to depict a first-hand encounter that I've had with a creature is what usually sets off the direction of what ends up becoming the next body of work.
The exhibit is free and runs from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Centennial Center Gallery is located at 400 West Gow Street, next to Kent City Hall. Sponsored by Kent Arts Commission.